During the freezing campaigns of World War II, when steel stoves froze shut and firewood turned to ice, soldiers on both sides discovered an ancient survival method that let them sleep through nights that would have otherwise been, well, lethal. This was not a stove nor a fire pit in the open. It was something far simpler, quieter and more efficient. A buried heating chamber that trapped warmth beneath the ground and released it slowly through the night. They called it, informally among units, the earthen oven. Unlike a typical campfire, this method could keep a dugout or trench livable for hours with almost no smoke, no light and no constant feeding of fuel. It was a system born from necessity, using the same principles bakers had used for centuries to trap and store heat inside brick ovens. But in this case, it wasn't bread they were baking. It was the warmth of survival. The idea of the earthen oven came from centuries-old thermal science rediscovered under wartime pressure. The concept behind the earthen oven was simple, but honestly quite brilliant. When the ground freezes and air temperatures plunge below zero, heat escapes rapidly from any exposed fire. Soldiers realized that if they moved the fire underground, just as traditional earth ovens did for cooking, it would radiate heat longer and more efficiently. Once the chamber heated up, they could seal it, and the surrounding soil would act as insulation, slowly releasing stored warmth through the ground and walls of nearby shelters. This method wasn't an invention of the 20th century. Ancient Persians, Finnish farmers and early Siberian tribes all used similar clay-lined fire pits for cooking and heating in permafrost regions. But during World War II, that ancient wisdom resurfaced out of desperation. Units stationed in Eastern Europe, Finland and northern China faced temperatures that killed in hours. Fuel was scarce, supply lines were frozen, and carrying metal stoves or chimneys risked detection by enemy aircraft. The answer was under their boots: soil, clay and stone, all materials that retained heat naturally when properly structured. Soldiers built the earthen oven directly beneath their shelters using layered materials and controlled airflow. The construction of a wartime earthen oven required only basic tools: a shovel, a flat stone or metal sheet, and a bit of ingenuity. Soldiers began by digging a pit roughly 1 metre deep and 2 metres long, ideally beneath or adjacent to the dugout or tent floor. The bottom was lined with stones or clay bricks to act as a thermal base. They then built a small firebox at one end of the pit. This was where the fire burned. Above it they placed a layer of flat stones or metal fragments salvaged from destroyed equipment, forming a lid or baking chamber that trapped radiant heat. The key was airflow. A narrow intake tunnel, often just a tin can duct or carved pipe, allowed oxygen to reach the fire, while an exhaust flue tunneled upward and away from camp, camouflaged by soil or debris. Once the fire burned hot for about 30 to 40 minutes, the soldiers would, extinguish the flame and seal the intake halfway. The glowing stones and packed earth kept releasing heat upward for, 6 to 8 hours. Many soldiers described how their trench walls grew warm to the touch, even as frost covered the ground above. It wasn't a roaring flame, but rather a steady, invisible warmth that made all the difference between frostbite and sleep. In rural and occupied regions, where civilians also struggled with fuel scarcity, locals learned the trick from stationed troops and, adapted it to their homes. Basements and root cellars became miniature ground furnaces. Families built clay-lined fire chambers under their kitchen floors or beside sleeping areas, channeling heat through flues made of tin or ceramic pipes. Because the system produced minimal smoke and consumed very little wood, it was honestly ideal for wartime blackouts and stealth conditions. Finnish soldiers in particular mastered this system, calling it the maa-uuni, or ground oven. It served dual purposes, cooking by day, heating by night. The dense heat stored in the clay chamber kept small bunkers above freezing, even in sub-zero snow. German troops on the Eastern Front also adopted a variation known as the earth stove trench, using broken tiles, rubble and mortar to construct makeshift radiant beds that, well, stayed warm for hours. The earthen oven worked because it used mass, not flame, to heat space. Soil, clay and stone have high thermal inertia. They absorb heat slowly but release it evenly over time. When the heat source was buried, less energy escaped into the open air. In effect, soldiers were using the same physics behind masonry heaters or modern rocket mass stoves. Short, intense combustion stored in a thermal mass. The surrounding earth then released that stored energy long after the fire was out. This design also eliminated smoke visibility, a crucial advantage during wartime. By extending the flue several meters away and keeping airflow limited, exhaust gases cooled and dispersed underground before emerging. It meant soldiers could heat their shelters even in enemy territory without betraying their position. The same principles applied today, especially for off-grid living or emergency winter setups. To replicate it, one can dig a pit roughly a metre deep and 60 centimetres wide, line the bottom with rocks and create a small air intake tunnel leading from outside. Build a short fire in the pit using dry wood, then cover the flame with a flat metal sheet or large stones. After the fire burns down to glowing embers, seal the intake halfway and cover the pit loosely with soil. The ground above will stay warm for hours, and the surrounding air temperature will rise noticeably in a small shelter. This method is especially useful in survival scenarios where maintaining a visible fire could attract unwanted attention, or when conserving fuel is critical. The same setup can also be built into permanent structures. By running a pipe or vent through the side of an earthen floor, you create a simple radiant heating system without electricity or metal stoves. For preppers, homesteaders, or anyone in cold climates, this technique is as valuable today as it was 80 years ago. The legacy of the earthen oven remains a quiet lesson in resilience and adaptation. The earthen oven heating trick stands as a perfect example of how survival doesn't always depend on new inventions. It often depends on rediscovering old ones. In the worst conditions, without modern materials or fuel, soldiers learned to bend the laws of heat and soil to their will. What they built from mud and fire saved lives across frozen battlefields. And for today's off-grid builders and historians, it's a reminder that some of the most effective technologies require nothing more than understanding the elements and using them wisely. This wartime design continues to inspire modern passive heating systems, from rocket mass benches to earth-sheltered homes. What began as an act of survival has become a blueprint for sustainable living. If you value rediscovering real, functional history, technologies that worked when failure meant death, subscribe to Relic Logic. Share this with other history enthusiasts and survival-minded thinkers who believe the past still holds the smartest solutions to our toughest modern problems. Because true innovation isn't about complexity, it's about endurance.